I think somebody had a quote yesterday. Pat Riley had said that a playoff series doesn't start until a road team wins a game. Well, the playoffs started then because in game one of the playoffs or game one of this series, Minnesota came to LA and took game one. So shocked, surprised, however you want to call it. Minnesota was phenomenal in game one, played perfect basketball, give them all the credit in the world, and they took game one. All right, so Lakers respond. They grab game two. And now, when I say road test for the Lakers, what I mean by that is anytime you go out on the road, you kind of start seeing how certain individuals are going to play in some of the more hostile environments. Sometimes players step up their game to another level. Sometimes players fold. And that's just kind of the reality of the situation, right? I'm going to throw some examples out there, and I think people are going to say, oh, damn, Sliwa throwing strays at guys that, we didn't even know. Let me go back. I think one of my hesitations I'll use as an example these last couple of years, I'll use D'Angelo Russell as an example. D'Lo in some of the biggest moments, hostile environments, on the road against Denver, D'Angelo Russell it wasn't the same player. Clearly wasn't as comfortable as he had been in some of the regular season games or maybe some of the games at home, because he did have good playoff performances, I think against Memphis and Golden State, but I believe all those games were at home. But you find out a little bit more about some of these players when you go out on the road. And I think this is a good example. Let me use Minnesota as an example. Minnesota in those first couple of games, you found out, okay, Naz Reid, I don't think it's going to affect him, but maybe it's going to affect some of these other players. Dante DiVincenzo, I don't think has been a factor this series. Rudy Gobert hasn't been a factor. But now they get home cooking. So how much is it going to help some of these teams now that they come back home? I like these road tests because I think you find out a lot about your team. When I was growing up and I'm watching Lakers basketball, and I was watching that Kobe Shaq era, when they went out on the road, yeah, it didn't matter how hostile the environment was. Derek Fisher's game didn't drop. Robert Ory's game didn't drop. Rick Fox's game didn't drop. I'm talking about some of the role players. Like Kobe and Shaq, stars are stars. They're typically going to do whatever they do, and it doesn't matter what the environment is. But those were some of the funnest games to watch because you're watching your team and it feels like everybody is against you, and you want to see what kind of performance that they have. Okay. Let's talk about the stars here for a quick second. Do you think Luka Doncic walking into a game, he had some quotes a couple days ago after the Lakers beat Minnesota and they got game two. Here's what he said about the expectations of the crowd in Minnesota. It's going to be high energy. I remember that they have amazing fans. They are very loud. At some point, they're going to make a run when we got to stick together. Arena, so it's going to be very tough. I experienced that. And it wasn't easy. We have to stay together no matter what. He was complimenting, right? I mean, if you really just kind of take a step back, Luka Doncic, I was there last year. I experienced what playing on the road against the Minnesota Timberwolves was, and it felt like, and again, I think most of the times you're going to have these types of players where it doesn't really mean anything to them. If they're going to have big-time players that are out there, if you're going to have big-time players in big-time situations, most of the time these guys come through, and this is kind of what they do. This isn't going to be anything new for Luka. It's going to be anything new for LeBron James, but it's more the role players that I'm going to be more curious about. Now, if I throw out there who's got more pressure of winning game three, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it, because I think you could look at game three and you could say to yourself, all right, well, the Lakers, they already lost home court advantage. There's a ton of pressure on the Lakers, but I would kind of pause for a quick second. I don't know if it's the Lakers that have more pressure. I think Minnesota, who got one of these first two games in LA, obviously is trying to carry momentum into Minnesota. I think if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves, you're looking at game three tonight. Of course, it's not a must win for either team, but the last thing Minnesota wants to do is give up ground of what they gained in LA. The last thing Minnesota wants to do is go down 2-1, losing game three, and now all of a sudden all the pressure is back on them for game four. Lakers can play as loose as they want in game four. Not to say that Lakers wouldn't have a ton of pressure too if they lost this game, but I think it's kind of fascinating to see this specific game because of some of the storylines. And I think there's going to be a ton of pressure on the Minnesota Timberwolves to see if they can obviously continue to build off what they did in LA. because the series is tied one apiece. Lakers go on the road. They're playing in Minnesota. Who do you think's got more pressure tonight to win? Because I will tell you this. I feel like if you're Minnesota and you just stole one in LA and you got home court advantage, and you're coming off a loss, whether that matters, whether you won game one or won game two, I feel like there's a little bit more pressure for Minnesota to get back in the win column, solidify that home court now is Minnesota's, because if the Lakers found a way to win game three, I think it becomes real danger time for Minnesota. Think about how loose the Lakers will be in game four. And you got Luka and you got LeBron. They're kind of potentially smelling blood in the water, two of the best killers in the league. Or do you disagree? Or do you think there's more pressure on the Lakers in game three?
I think just like there was more pressure on the Lakers in game two to win that game as opposed to the Timberwolves, I believe there's more pressure on the Timberwolves to win game three. For similar reason. If, to your point, if Minnesota, or rather, if the Lakers win game three, they're up 2-1 going into Sunday's game four. That's the game where you're like, all right, like if you're Minnesota, like that's almost one of your must-win games, because if you just don't want to fall down 3-1. So I'm also a big game four guy, like, so maybe like I'm tilting my hand to show you like how much I value game fours. If a series is really that good of a series or that tight of a series.
Sure.
But yeah, I think if the Lakers win game three, then Minnesota's like that becomes must win in terms of Minnesota for game four. But if Minnesota wins game three rather, I think the Lakers can feel good about, all right, game four is still very important for them, but they could and conceivably, feel better about game four than the Timberwolves would feel about game four, because you don't want a team to come into your place and win 2 games in a row on your home court. Like that's where my mind goes. And that becomes more likely, obviously, if the Lakers win game three. So for Minnesota,
I think it's also too, I think, Kobe, I think it's also who are you playing against? And I think this just Luka and LeBron, you were there after game two and you heard Luka with some of his post-game comments talking about playing in Minnesota. The crowd is awesome and, it's a hostile environment. And I know because I was there a year ago when they played in Minnesota. But there's certain players that these are their moments. This is what they do. This is what they do when they're if they got a chance to bury you, there's a good chance they're going to bury you. And that's kind of, I guess, what I'm referring to is the danger Minnesota runs into if they don't win tonight. You then got a Lakers team that's basically, especially JJ Redick and some of these other guys, we got a chance to go for the kill. We go for the kill. And now all of a sudden, shots for Naz Reid or Jaden McDaniels or Nikhil Walker outside, you're a little tighter if you're down 2-1 and you got that home crowd that's also feeling a certain way. I do feel like some of that pressure shifts.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why again, I hesitate to call game three must win, especially in a series that, I mean, yes, it's tied 1-1, but Minnesota still has the point difference from their advantage. Like Minnesota's just, for more or less, I think Minnesota's just played overall better this series, even though it's only been 2 games. I hesitate to call game three must win for Minnesota, but this is one of those, hey, if you don't pull this one out, game four becomes, like you said, very tight. You get the nerves can get flowing if you don't come out in game four, knocking your shots down or finding that rhythm or shutting. Like that's when the game, not just the game, but the series can start teetering in one team's favor. That's why, like, I'm looking forward to game three. It's going to be awesome to cover this game. I can't wait for game four. I can't wait, especially depending on how tonight goes. And the reason why is because I feel like this series has started to take on an identity just through its physicality and just being like mean and nasty, and that Lakers added to that identity in game two. But tonight will be illuminating in terms of what directions, like in terms of what's the identity of the series, not who's going to win the series, but what is the identity of the series going to be? Like, what are we going to remember this series, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks for? What's the buzzword we're going to use for it? Right now, I would say physicality or nastiness. Some people may just say Luka, but that's what I'm looking forward to. Just games 3 and 4, Minnesota 4.
All right, thank you very much for watching the clip. Just want to give a shout out here to one of our partners, the Wallace Firm. They are official injury attorney of the Sliwa Show and Hoops Talk, the entire channel. If you are ever in a need, and I hope you're not, but some type of serious injury with yourself or a family member of yours, I would like to personally help you by introducing you to the best in the business, Brad Wallace and the Wallace Firm. Also got a URL out here that you can use as well. Just go to wallacewins.com/Sliwa. Thank you for their partnership, and thank you for being a part of the Sliwa Show.